Yo, we're back. We're going to finish off chapter 10. We're up to step 9, taking ownership of your perceptions. In this step, you were going to sum up all the other steps listed above. In the previous steps, we were just isolating the interconnection between facts as they truly exist and your interpretations of them. You are now also fully aware of the impact your interpretations have on the things you think about, how you feel, and your behavior. Now we're going to take things to a whole other level. At this point, you know all these processes are going on. You know at this point that your assumptions play a big role in the outcomes you get. At this stage, you're going to take ownership of the whole process. You're going to choose which reality you want for yourself. This is where judgment comes in. You're going to consciously say, I know that when I think this way, this is usually what happens. I feel defeated, small, powerless, ugly, and hopeless. I know that when I think certain things, it always puts me on that path. This has happened many, many times before. At this point, your cognitive behavioral therapist would then say, can you find other paths? This is where you start piecing things together that are an alternative. There is an element of wishing here as well. You obviously wish that there is a better way. You obviously wish for better outcomes. That is obvious. You're not being unrealistic when you do that because that's part of the human condition. Everybody is drawn to pleasure and tends to shy away from pain. No surprises there. But at this point, your therapist would then work with you to come up with an alternative path. And by work with you, I'm not talking about feeding models or plans in your head. They're not doing it right if that's what they're doing. Instead, they prompt you and even challenge you to come up with an alternative. You know that the way you've always done things leads to negative places. That's a non-starter. So now you're starting over again. Your therapist is then asking you, what is the better way? Come up with a plan, piece it together. What kind of action steps will you have when certain situations occur? Maybe it's a past memory, maybe it's a current experience, and maybe it's a predictable pattern that you constantly encounter at work or in some sort of social situation. Whatever the case may be, you have to now start coming up with an alternative. This has to be detailed. You're basically saying to yourself, okay, if I say these two things, 1, 2, and 3, if I say these things, 1, 2, and 3, I will do X, Y, and Z. I will not do A, B, C. I've been doing A, B, C since forever. Look at me, I'm not happy. I'm not living up to my fullest potential. You're going to engage in these positive internal dialogues. It has to be emotional. It has to register at the heart level. Otherwise, it's not real. Step 10. Approach your personal change with a sense of urgency. I've got some bad news for you. I really do. All the information that I've shared here with you is not going to change your life. If you do this one thing, keep it in your head. If you approach the materials that I'm sharing with you from a purely intellectual level, forget about it. Change is not going to happen. I know that sounds harsh. It might even seem dismissive, but it's true. If you were to look at all the information that I have shared with you here and you just file it into your mental cabinets, nothing is going to happen. You can see the connection, you can see the necessity, you can see the internal logic, you can see the patterns, but none of that is going to help you. It may make all the sense in the world. You may fully understand how cognitive behavioral therapy works. You might have a greater appreciation of the role of the CBT therapist, but your life will continue to remain unchanged. Why? You did not let it sink into your heart. You did not allow this intellectual information to become emotional information. People are emotional creatures. We talk a big game about how logical and rational we are, but at the end of the day, we make all sorts of impulsive decisions based on our emotional state. When we are called out regarding those decisions, our rational side kicks in, and we come up with all sorts of seemingly logical explanations for why we made the decisions that we did. According to a fairly recent psychological research study, Consumers were questioned regarding their purchasing decisions, and it turns out the vast majority actually made the decisions impulsively. But when asked to explain their decisions, they would come up with all sorts of logical or seemingly reasonable explanations. You have to eventually operate at an emotional level. You have to develop that sense of urgency. Unfortunately, it's not going to happen if you don't let the information that I've shared with you sink into that level of your heart. That's when you will get the drive and the power to keep pushing. Please understand that what you're doing is very difficult. It really is. It's really hard to change. We get accustomed to the way we're doing things. Our brain's always looking for the path of least resistance. Our brains are very powerful and efficient biochemical machines. Once the brain creates a connection, it's very hard to break. But that's precisely what you need to do. To get the power to do that consistently over an extended period of time, you need an emotional sense of urgency. This is when you make the transition from viewing cognitive behavioral therapy as a nice little option that you can take if you have the time, to something that you must do. This is something that just has to happen. Otherwise, you're going to suffer tremendously. This is how you should think about CBT. This is how you should frame it. Nothing less will do. Cognitive behavioral therapy progression. What follows is the progression your CBT therapist will walk you through to enable you to take full control of your thought process and take necessary action. This doesn't have a timeline. Some people proceed through the list very quickly. Others will take some time. Everybody's different. No two brains are alike, so don't worry about zipping through the list. If you are taking much longer, it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. It doesn't mean that you are a weak person. It doesn't mean any of that. Everybody has a different pace. It's perfectly okay if it takes you a long time to get from point to point. What's important is that you make that journey. Ultimately, the only thing that really matters is that you are taking action on your need to change. Again, I don't want to repeat myself here, but I need to do it for emphasis. You can read all the information I have shared with you, but until and unless you take action, this information is not going to change your life. You have to act. You can't just plug the information into your brain and just kick it around like dull, lifeless, intellectual concepts. That's not going to do you any good. You have to take action. What follows is the process. Start with a single thought. The first thing you need to do with cognitive behavioral therapy is to zero in on your thoughts on an item-by-item basis. Start with one single thought. Pay close attention to how you verbally describe that thought. Are there any loaded words that you are using? Are there any trigger words that you are using? These are emotional words. For example, there's a big difference between request and demand. There's a big difference between will and may. This may seem small, but if you spot them in how you speak about your thoughts, you learn a lot about your unstated assumptions. Keep hammering that single thought about yourself. Are there any hidden assumptions? Is it accurate? Is it valid? Does it reflect reality in terms of facts? 2. Expose all assumptions. Now that you have picked away at a single thought that you have thought about yourself, lay out all the assumptions that this thought depends on. Assumptions, of course, can vary from the things that you assume that you are perceiving to how you connect what you are... Sorry, this is a bit of a chunky sentence. Assumptions, of course, can vary from the things that you assume that you are perceiving to how you connect what you think you're seeing or perceiving with things that happen in the past or what will happen in the future. Lay all these out. There is no right or wrong answer. Right off the top of your head, this is a stream of consciousness exercise. Just lay it out. Nobody's going to check your work. Nobody should be looking over your shoulder. This is just you. This is private information. Just lay it out. Don't hold back. You're not going to offend anybody. You're not going to let anybody down. The only person that you're going to disappoint is yourself if you hold back. So lay it out. What are you assuming when you think that single thought about yourself? 3. Question your beliefs. Assumptions are beliefs. They are beliefs about what you think is true or how things should be. Now, using your superior mental processing firepower, hack away at these beliefs. Are these true? Are they true now? Are they going to be true in the future? How good of a job do they do in explaining the past? How do these beliefs position you? Do they put you in a good light? Do they give you strength? Do they help you become a more effective person? What kind of facts do they draw on? Are these facts real, or are they also assumptions? In a way, this exercise is similar to taking a ball of string and unwinding it to see smaller knots inside the ball. You unwind those, you take a belief and you break it apart. There are smaller beliefs there. Break those apart until you're left with your assessment of reality. Now at this stage, you're going to say to yourself, is this accurate, or are there alternative interpretations? If it's accurate, does it hurt me? If it hurts me, are there alternative applications that will at least make the overall effect neutral? When you do this, you see how your beliefs have been distorted. Maybe you're blowing things out of proportion. Maybe you're not looking at the actual facts. 4. Be sure the personal facts are really facts. I know that the subheading is kind of confusing, but the truth is, when we look at the past events of our lives, we often read into them elements that actually arose from later issues in our lives. It's like a historian going through a war, rewriting the history of a battle that took place in a distant past. In this rewrite, all the hopes, dreams, and wishes of that historian society in the here and now are projected onto the past. So when the students in the future read about historical narrative of a battle that happened a long, long time ago, it actually speaks to the values and objectives of a later date. Historians do this all the time. Political commentators do this. Politicians definitely do this. And believe it or not, people living their individual lives do this when it comes to their personal histories. Well, doing this obviously serves a very important purpose. It gives you a sense of direction. It gives you a sense of meaning. But the problem is, you have to be aware that you're doing this. And you have to be aware that ultimately it is a lie. This is why you have to look at the facts that you think exist in your life and break them up. Is this what really happened? Are there gaps? Is the timeline correct, or has it been shrunk? Has it been pasted together and fused with stuff that happened later on? This is especially true when it comes to experiences of abuse. A lot of clinical psychologists and counselors got into a lot of trouble in the past because they asked the wrong questions to their patients. These questions were loaded, they were not neutral. They did not lay out a neutral platform for the patient to hash out his or her issues. Instead, they were loaded questions. There were assumptions in them. And it's no surprise that the patient started filling in the assumptions. If you want to see a horrific example of this, look up the case of McMartin Daycare. In that case, government social workers interviewed kids regarding sexual molestation and abuse in a daycare center. The questions they asked essentially coached the kids to give the answers the investigators were looking for. This resulted in a series of indictments of people that ran the daycare. It turns out that the kids were basically trying to please the person interviewing them. So when the interviewee said, "Did this person touch you?" or "How did this person touch you?" all these horrific details would come out. It turns out that this was all imagined information to fit the questions. You may be doing the same with yourself. You may be reading all sorts of issues into past facts. And the more you do this, the more hardwired those facts seem. They seem really immovable because, hey, you believed in them for so long. Well, now it is time to take a sledgehammer and start blasting away at the things that you assume are facts. This doesn't take much effort. You don't have to have a graduate degree to do this. You just basically have to ask the journalist 6 questions. Who, what, where, when, why, and how. Here's a pro tip. Do not start with why. Focus on everything else first. You will quickly discover that a lot of facts that you have automatically assumed were true are actually spotty at best. There might be certain key elements missing, but you still assume that this is the truth. But there is a key element missing, and that key element is actually what would justify you making all these negative conclusions based on these facts. If you were to plug in those missing parts, these facts may well support a completely different conclusion. This is how you know that your beliefs are distorted. You don't have to put yourself through this process. 6. Understand the power of mood. Please understand that when you're looking at past facts and trying to make an analysis or trying to judge what happened in the past, it is dependent on how you feel at that given point in time. A lot of people discount this. They think, well, facts are facts. I just need to think about certain things and the explanation and the conclusion will pretty much jump out at me. It doesn't take much effort. It's smooth and it flows just like water. Fine, you can feel that way, but understand that your mood at that time actually impacts how easy it is for you to accept that conclusion. And when you're in the same mood, when you think about that fact over and over again, you become blind to the fact that you were analyzing that fact in the worst way. Pay attention to your mood when you think of certain things and situations. For example, when you're feeling lonely and you think about your ex-girlfriend and the way she lied to you, cheated on you, took money from you, what kind of facts do you think you will draw? What will you focus on? What kind of facts do you think will become blind to you? Do you see how this works? Pay attention to your mood. Your mood might actually be putting you in a situation where you will constantly draw the wrong conclusions. Now let's flip the script. Let's say you're in a happy mood because you met somebody new. She's so awesome compared to all the other women you've been with. Are you thinking about your ex-girlfriend now? Probably not. You're in a good mood. You feel like you're on top of the world. Do you see how this works? Do not neglect the importance of mood. It actually plays a bigger role. So next episode, we're on chapter 11, CBT best practices, and this looks like it'll be the last of the book. So thank you all for watching. I'll see you in the last episode next time.